My uncle has a strange set of rules. I moved in to live with my uncle, who has a strange set of rules. When I was 12 years old, I was forced to spend the summer with my uncle Jeremy. You see, back then I was quite a mischievous kid. My parents thought that if I spent time with a strict and irritable uncle, I would be reformed. You can imagine how much I rolled my eyes when my parents told me about that plan. But I had no idea about the horrors that I would have to go through that summer. Uncle Jeremy is a true mountain man. He lives in the wilderness, remote and deep in the Montana pine forest. As a self-sufficient person, he built a life in a place where most people would probably go crazy. Actually, back then I also found him a bit eccentric. My dad practically kicked me out of the car when we got to my uncle's cabin in the mountains. He didn't even wait for Uncle Jeremy to come out and greet me. I just stood there, watching my dad's little Toyota drive back down the long driveway and onto the bumpy dirt road, leaving me all alone. Even though I felt a bit abandoned being left like that, I wasn't jealous of the long journey ahead of him. Just that rough dirt road alone took nearly 2 hours to travel. At times, I even thought the Toyota would get stuck in the woods. As the taillights of the car gradually disappeared behind the thick tree canopies, I turned my attention to the old wooden cabin in front of me. It didn't look anything like the cozy wooden cabin in the pictures. I could clearly see that it had endured many harsh years. The logs had faded from the harsh summer sun and the cold winter winds. I can be sure that everything in the house was taken from the surrounding forest. There were no signs of modern conveniences. There are no power lines. There were no fire hydrants, not even a satellite dish. I knew right away that this summer would be even more boring than I had imagined. I raised my hand to knock on the door, but paused when I saw some deep scratches on the wooden door. What about the bear? I wondered. A feeling of unease rose within me, as if someone was watching me from the woods. I looked up at the trees, feeling like something was calling me closer. The door suddenly creaked open, pulling me back to reality. Standing in the hallway was a man with silver hair and a long, tangled beard. His skin was wrinkled, like old parchment. I guess it's because the sun and wind have worn it down over the years, just like the house. The cloudy eyes stared at me intently. I had never met Uncle Jeremy before, but I had heard about him from my father. My dad also went through the same thing as I did, being sent here during the summer, before 7th grade, going into 8th. He told me that Uncle Jeremy wasn't someone to joke around with. He warned me, "You have to listen to everything Uncle Jeremy says. Don't be foolish and provoke him." My dad will lecture. But when I looked at that aged face, I didn't see anything fierce or scary at all. On the contrary, he seemed almost kind, nothing like the fierceness my dad had mentioned. "I'm Marcus." I reached out my hand to greet, but Uncle Jeremy immediately swatted my hand away and covered my mouth. "Shh, you're not supposed to say names here." He moved my head to the side to make sure no one or nothing was listening. I recalled more about my dad's description of my uncle. "Uncle Jeremy's a bit strange, but he always cares about your well-being. Try to overlook his rudeness." Now, everything Uncle Jeremy says is starting to make sense. He quickly pulled me inside the house, and I think I heard him whisper my name as he pushed me in. Until I turned back and saw the fear on Uncle's face. At that moment, I knew that sound had drifted into the early summer breeze, somewhere beyond the trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What's going on, Uncle Jeremy?" I asked. Slap. A slap came down on my face. "Damn it, kid, I told you not to say the name." Uncle Jeremy gritted his teeth and immediately turned to look towards the forest. Like in a nightmare, a distant voice echoed, whispering from deep within the darkness. "Yeah, I'm just kidding." "What the hell is that?" I stammered a question, but Uncle Jeremy didn't answer. Instead, Uncle Jeremy slammed the door shut. "Rule number 1, do not say the name." I bowed my head in the face of his seriousness. "Rule number 2, if you hear any strange sounds, just ignore it. Do you understand?" I hesitate before asking further. "But why?" "No more questions about this issue. This is the law. You better listen, or I'll send you straight back to Boise. Do you hear me clearly? At that moment, escaping from my self-sufficient life became clear. Break a few rules here and there, and I would be back home soon. I try not to smile at the scheme forming in my mind. Your room is down there. The old man pointed down a small hallway before personally leading me there. We walked into a small 10x10 room. I threw my backpack onto the bed and plopped down right next to it, letting out a sigh of relief. What do you think you're doing? This is not a luxurious resort in the mountains. I look at the crumbling wooden walls, truly a humility of the century. I tell myself, we have work to do. He moved to the window and pushed the shutters open. Take a deep breath of the fresh mountain air. In the distance, there was a 2-acre clearing in the woods. A mix of fields, like more celebrated gardens, and livestock, chickens, goats, and a stray dog. He turned to me and noticed my disappointed face. You think this is a free trip? No, we work to earn our food here, he said with a hint of joy at first, and I could see the wind on his face. He opened a drawer in the nightstand. I put these things here for you before you arrived. I looked into the drawer and found a pair of old torn overalls. Put them on and come out to meet me. There's still a lot of work to do here. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can have a delicious dinner. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep. My whole body is sore. Uncle Jeremy isn't joking. Life in the wild is really not for the weak. We worked until dusk, which in the summer in Montana means around 9:30 p.m. We pulled weeds in the fields, fed the chickens, and milked the dairy cow I found out was named Bessie, and did a ton of other not-so-fun chores. The best part about it was Uncle Jeremy said we would do it all over again the next day. I put the pillow over my face, hoping that it would suffocate me. I am a dog abandoned by a cow, needing to be freed from its suffering. The warmth of the velvet fabric seemed to make me feel a little more comfortable, so I left it there as night began to fall. Just as I was about to drift into a restless night, I heard scratching from the other side of the wall. It came from outside. The sound is very faint. It almost reminded me of the time we had mice inside the walls at home. The only thing is, these walls aren't hollow, they're solid wood. I moved the pillow aside to make sure nothing muffled the scratching sound from above me. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound seems rhythmic. It's like someone is sending a message. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Whatever it is, it's scratching deeper into the side of the house. The source of that noise is making a sound way too loud for a mouse. It could be a raccoon. Then, the sound grew louder, turning into a piercing screech, like someone was scratching at an old blackboard. Creak, creak, creak. I sat up straight. It must be a bear. Montana grizzly bears always scare the hell out of me. That's also part of the reason why I had never gone to see Uncle Jeremy before. I heard the same faint whispering coming from the tree as this morning. But this time, instead of calling Uncle Jeremy's name, my own name hissed through the cracks of the cabin. Marcus. I looked at the shutters on the window, and my heart sank when I saw something slowly pulling them open. Uncle Jeremy. I screamed. From the end of the hallway, I heard the bedroom door swing open. Next came the sound of my bedroom door. Uncle Jeremy stood there, holding a .22 rifle, his eyes meeting mine, before he realized the shutters were slowly closing. Uncle leaned the gun against the wooden wall before rushing to the shutters and slamming them shut. He quickly locked the latch before turning to me. Kid, we have 2 rules, and you broke both of them on your very first night. He yelled in my face while I was trying to figure out what just happened. I hoped that the more my uncle talked, the clearer things would become. But everything he said only confused me more and, to be honest, scared me. Now you've done it? Kid, now it knows our names, it's etched deep into us. You have no idea how hard it is to get rid of the last one. In the end, I think, Uncle, what are you talking about? I'm shaking. Forget it, from now on you have to lock the shutters tight here. He doesn't need to remind me a second time. The whole house will be locked up tight. And just to be sure, if you hear me calling your name, it's not me. What the hell is that? What else could it be? I think before I open my mouth to ask a clarifying question, what is that? I asked, what is our second rule? My uncle commands, and I think for a moment before responding. If you see something, ignore it, exactly, leave it alone, we won't talk about this anymore. Mentioning it will only make it stronger. Suddenly, I'm no longer interested in the plan to make Uncle Jeremy send me home. The next morning, after breakfast, 3 o'clock, S and I walk. Homemade. Today he wears a gun belt with a pistol. The Magnum is idly snug in its holster. Looking at the scratches on the wall, I was sure that it couldn't have been a grizzly bear making that noise. These scratches are actually a message. On the logs is a mysterious symbol. A circle with 3 jagged lines is drawn through the fruit. Above this circle are 2 names, Jeremy and Marcus. I swallow hard as Uncle Jeremy looks closer. Uncle chuckles nervously. He will come back tonight. My uncle's voice trembles even though he tries to sound tough. I feel my stomach twist with anxiety. Suddenly Bessie, my uncle's dairy cow, let out a painful moan. I can clearly see that it's scared. Uncle Jeremy returned with a sad expression. He stood up and walked towards the cow. When he was a few feet away from the cow, he knelt down on one knee. The story has begun. I stepped closer and was frozen in shock at the horrifying sight that still haunts me to this day. Bessie's udder was torn apart, with chunks of flesh hanging limply, flies buzzing around the bloody wounds. Blood mixed with milk, creating a disgusting, slimy substance. Poor Bessie, Uncle Jeremy's voice was full of emotion. I can see that my uncle is heartbroken, watching his cow suffer like that. I moved to comfort my uncle, but before my hand could touch his shoulder, he stood up. Uncle pulled out the revolver and aimed at Bessie's head. A gunshot rang out as all the birds in the area flew away in a panic. Bessie is dead. It lay motionless in a pool of blood, brains splattered on the ground. Uncle Jeremy dashed away, wiping his tears, then quickly turned and headed towards the wooden house. Let's go, kid, we need to get ready. I know that tonight we are about to enter a battle. As night fell, Uncle Jeremy and I didn't talk much. We fenced off the house and brought all the livestock inside. 22 chickens, 7 goats, and a flock of geese. He handed me a shotgun and taught me how to use it. Even though my uncle told me to only shoot if something happened to him. Most of the time, the night is very quiet. The chickens and geese have been put in the coop. The herd of goats gradually lost their restlessness in the new environment. They huddled together in a group in the corner of the living room. I almost feel at peace. Until everything exploded, the livestock screamed wildly. The chickens are flapping their wings in a panic, the goats are in a frenzy, running around trying to find any hiding place they can. Most of them are now huddled under the dining table. Almost as soon as the chaos began, everything went silent. I looked at Uncle Jeremy in confusion, but his gaze told me he had seen all of this before. Uncle's eyes are directed towards the door. A familiar sound drifted across the other side. It was the scratching we had heard the night before. Similarly, the scratching grew more intense before exploding into a frantic banging. I stared at the door as the latch struggled to keep something on the other side out. A voice rang out right after that. Jeremy, 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 oh, Uncle Jeremy, that voice is mine. The thing outside is mimicking my voice. It changed its tone. This time it's Uncle Jeremy's voice, Marcus. Open the door, Marcus. Uncle Jeremy looked at me before raising the pistol towards the door. A gunshot rang out and the sound of something hitting the floor. You can see the wind from our vantage point. My uncle stood up and walked towards the door. The pistol is ready. I wanted to tell Uncle to stay still, but I didn't have the courage. Uncle unlocked the top lock and then the bottom one. The door cautiously opened and Uncle Jeremy peered out through the small crack. I will remember the words he said for the rest of my life. Oh, damn. Suddenly a claw reached through a small crack in the door and pulled my uncle out of the comfort of the house. I heard a scream, but I wasn't sure if it was Uncle Jeremy's or that of the thing impersonating him. Everything went silent, and I struggled with the idea of what the outcome of the struggle would be. At that moment, I heard a voice that brought me a wave of relief. "It's okay, kid, I've got it." I heard Uncle Jeremy scratching as he seemed to stand up from the other side of the door. But as the door slowly opened, my heart sank. That wasn't my uncle. That was the creature that had taken him. Its body was tall and thin, its skin pale, and its face, well, it had no face, just a mere outline. But as it stood there and turned towards me, a mouth began to open. The skin stuck to its upper and lower jaws, like large lumps of chewing gum, until finally they gave way to sharp teeth. It spoke again in my uncle's voice. "Marcus." It sprinted towards me, and when it was just a few meters away, a bullet from a handgun fired. The creature fell to the floor in a pool of green blood. Standing in the doorway was my injured Uncle Jeremy. After that night, I had no problem following any of Uncle Jeremy's rules, no matter how arbitrary they were. We worked on his farm all summer, and I never mentioned his name again. I'm never one to follow the rules, but in this case, I won't be summoning another creature. Even though I saw those things darting through the trees, I never brought them up. By the end of summer, I was determined that I would never spend another day with my Uncle Jeremy, a model citizen inside and out. 10 years later, I received the news that my Uncle Jeremy had passed away. At first, I suspected it was just old age. After all, he was getting old. But my dad told me that he was attacked by a bear and lost his life. He was a tough guy, and a tough guy has to go out like a real man. I looked at myself. But then I started to wonder if a bear was really the culprit. I think about the creature that used to call from the other side of the wall. I think about its soulless face and its stealthy claws. One day before I was set to attend my uncle's funeral, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was Uncle Jeremy's mailbox. I figured he left something for me in his will. But when I opened the envelope, I found a piece of paper. Written in blood is the same circle that Uncle Jeremy and I found carved on the other side of the wall. The lines crossing it were also smeared. I looked up at the top of the circle. 2 identical names were written. The only thing is, this time one was crossed out, Uncle Jeremy's name. In that moment, I heard a faint scratching sound from the other side of my house in Idaho. I don't know how, but one of them found me.